The NFL sent out a memo on Wednesday that the salary cap is going up, way up, and that's good news for the Carolina Panthers. How exactly does it impact them heading into free agency? Well, I'll tell you right here on Locked On Panthers.
You are Locked On Panthers, your daily Carolina Panthers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into another edition of the Locked On Panthers podcast, a part of the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, as always, Julian Council, talking Carolina Panthers with you every Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. Your team every day. That's our motto here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Thanks for watching the show here on YouTube and listening wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. Be sure to follow me, Julian Council, over on Twitter at Julian Council, because tomorrow is Friday, and on Fridays throughout the entirety of the offseason, I'm right here answering your weekly Friday mailbag questions. So what you got to do to get your questions in is by either adding me on Twitter or DMing me on Twitter at Julian Council to get those weekly Friday mailbag questions in for tomorrow's show. And on today's show, let's continue to look ahead to free agency for the Carolina Panthers, which is only a couple of weeks away. And a big memo was sent out on Wednesday by the NFL to all 32 teams, letting them know the salary cap and what the increase is likely going to be. And obviously that's important because you want to know how much cap space do you have to go out there to sign players that you are looking at in free agency, to sign your draft class, to have to work with throughout the entirety of the regular season, but also just like to do everything you need to do to build this team this offseason. And the NFL provided clubs with a projected salary cap range of $277.5 million to $281.5 million. Teams were budgeting for far less. They were thinking that the cap was going to be between 265 to 275 on the high end at minimum. When looking at it from last year to this year, it's going to be a $22.1 million leap forward from the $255.4 million salary cap of 2024. And at its largest, it's going to be a $26.1 million increase. So either $22 to $26 million more in salary cap space upcoming here for the 2025 season. And the estimation also means that the cap would have increased at least $100 million since 2018, when it was only $177 million, and more than $53 million in the last 2 years. And recall the pandemic, how the situation with the salary cap played out. That had it a little bit lower than what it's expected. Had that never happened, now we see it closing in on eventually probably going to be $300 million salary cap space. So great for all the players out there getting paid. And also good news for the Carolina Panthers. And how does this projected increase impact Carolina? Like, I have no idea whether they were thinking that they're going to have 265 or 270, 275. I don't know where they were budgeting as far as that scale goes. I would imagine that Brant Tillis, who is the EVP of football operations here in Carolina, who handles salary cap and contracts, was looking at low-end projection, a middle projection, and a high-end projection, just if he's a smart math guy, which obviously he is. And I think that would be the wise thing for a lot of teams to do. And I imagine that's exactly what Brant Tillis did. Either way, they had a plan, and now they can plan further for what they want to do upcoming in what I believe is in a very important offseason for this team, where you have your quarterback, looks like the offensive line for the most part set. Offensively, you have a running back, got some wide receiver weapons, probably want to add a little bit more there to the wide receiver room, certainly at tight end. And defensively, you got JC, you got Derek Brown, and you got Josie Jewell and Trevor Wallace to a lesser extent there in the middle of the defense at linebacker, but they got a lot to do to fix that defense. And now you could be in a position, still in a division that's wide open, to maybe be competitive, and who knows, win it and go to the playoffs this upcoming season in 2025. Looking at overthecap.com, they are projecting Carolina to have $24.8 million in salary cap, and that is not that much more than what they were already projecting in the previous weeks, where I was looking at it the last time I saw it, it was at $20.3 million. So only a $4.5 million increase as far as Carolina goes when looking at overthecap.com. and what they project for Carolina to have upcoming in free agency. And understand this, they have posted the J.J. Jansen contract. He's about a $1 million cap hit for Carolina this upcoming season. They have not posted Andy Dalton's extension, which we'll talk about here momentarily. He signed that on Tuesday afternoon. He currently has a void year that has a $2.9 million salary cap hit on the salary cap in 2025. I'm not sure how the extension impacts that salary cap hit. And once it's posted, we'll certainly talk about it here as Carolina looks to open up some more space. And they'll want to do that because clearly $24.8 million is not enough to sign your rookie class, to be able to also sign a high-end edge rusher, maybe a top-end wide receiver if you want to do that, safety, all of those things that they need to do. And I'm not saying that they have to get a top-tier wide receiver, that they also have to get a top-tier edge rusher and a starting safety, but certainly they want to add to the wide receiver room, need to bring in more tight ends as well. They need to figure out what they're going to do on the offensive line, and they're probably going to have to, of course, re-sign Cade Mays or Austin Corbett, and that's going to cost them some money to do. They don't have enough money currently to be able to do all the things that they need to do just on the surface in this 2025 offseason to improve the team, and not just improve it, but to get the team to be competitive. But also, you want to improve the team, you need more than $24.8 million in salary cap space. We all, I would hope, understand and recognize that looking at things. Now, there's a couple of moves that I think that Carolina really needs to make, or at least could make, to open up some salary cap space as we approach March 12th, which is the first day of the new league year. Looking at Taylor Moton first. And this is going to be a really interesting one, considering right now he has a $31.3 million cap hit. That is by far the largest on the team. That is 11.2% of the salary cap. We talked about this a couple days ago. You want to look at the percentage of the salary cap. I was talking about Eddie Pinheiro, and if the Panthers wanted to re-sign him, looking at some of the other kickers out there, like Cammy Fairbairn down there in Houston, like Harrison Butker in Kansas City, their cap hits are like 1.9%, 2%. This past year, it was 1% for Eddie. So you're really not wanting to pay your kicker only 2% of the salary cap moving forward in the next couple of years, as he's one of the top kickers in the NFL as far as the history of accuracy at that position. Not a big leg. We had that conversation. Go back and listen to it or watch it, please, if you like. But looking at this, do you really want your right tackle taking up 11.2% of the salary cap when he's a good player? He's a durable player. First time in his entire career he had missed time this season in 2024, but he's never been a Pro Bowler. He's never been an All-Pro. He's not going to be a Hall of Fame kind of player. Could certainly be in the Hall of Honor here in Carolina, but that's a lot for your right tackle. And just to put it into perspective, Baker Mayfield, who is a franchise quarterback down there in Tampa, our old friend Baker, currently he's set to take up 12.5% of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers salary cap. That is not that much for a starting quarterback, where a guy like Mahomes is taking up like 25%, a quarter of the salary cap. You don't want that situation with Taylor Moton. So they could potentially restructure him yet again for the fourth straight offseason, since Taylor Moton went out there and signed that extension a couple of years ago, and the Panthers slapped a franchise tag on him right before the deadline in July. They signed him to an extension. Every single offseason after that, 2022, 23, 24, they have restructured his deal. But go back to last year, and this is a quote that Joe Person put in his most recent article over on The Athletic when talking about some of the salary cap implications for the Carolina Panthers this offseason, some of the decisions that they need to make. He put this quote out there from Dan Morgan, again, made at the Combine last year, saying, we're going to do things the right way, not kind of kick the can down the road. We want to evenly distribute and pay year to year as opposed to kicking the can down the road. So that's why Brant's here. That being Brant Tillis, the Executive Vice President of Football Operations, here to handle contracts and salary cap for the Panthers. So if they're not going to kick the can down the road, that would mean they're not going to restructure and open up $12.1 million salary cap space. So what are their options? Well, one option is to let Taylor Moton play out the rest of this deal. It's the last year of his deal. Or what I would prefer them to do is go out and to extend him. Doesn't need to be a massive extension. Can be an extension where he gets this year, he gets 2026, and then after that, you could get out of the deal if you wanted to, since he's on the other side of 30. That could be something that makes sense. But we're seeing offensive linemen, just players in general, playing longer than they ever have. And it's not like he's someone who's had a ton of injuries, and maybe that's led to more wear and tear on his body because he's not missed a lot of games. Either way, he's been really solid for you at right tackle, and I would think that Carolina would rather keep that really solid right tackle who's been durable and has been reliable and save $12.9 million rather than letting him play it out and not saving nearly $13 million. That's just my thoughts. So that's one way to open up some things. Another way, which is so obvious to me, and I think to everyone, is to extend J.C. Horn. He finally played a full season. Granted, did miss the final 2 games of the year, but 15 out of 17 games. That's much better than missing 29 out of the first 51 games of his career. JC showed you what he could be in a full season, and that led to him being a Pro Bowler this past year. The Panthers decide, which I think they should right now, he's set to make $12.4 million on the 5th-year option, and that would also represent his cap hit if they want to extend him, which I think they absolutely should, as he is a top 10 corner in my opinion. Now, PFF didn't think that this past season. Not quite sure how that's possible, but J.C. Horn showed via being a Pro Bowler that he certainly is, and it was this past year, if they are able to extend him. And they have plenty of time to do it, but you would like to do it prior to March 10th, really, as you have the legal negotiating period. You want to do it prior to that weekend going into it. They'd want to get that done. If they do, that frees up $9 million of the salary cap. So that's $22 million about that you're able to open up by just extending both Moton and J.C. Horn, 2 of your best players, to open up some salary cap space. Now, there's a couple of guys as well that are clear candidates to be salary cap casualties, and this is mainly because of how they performed in Carolina. The first one is Miles Sanders, and we have known for a long time, really go back to last April when the Panthers traded back and then traded back up right there in the second round to draft Jonathan Brooks, the rookie running back out of Texas, who was on a torn ACL. So we did know that Miles Sanders is going to get an opportunity while Jonathan Brooks recovered to play behind Chuba Hubbard. Didn't really get that many opportunities. He got injured. Brooks got injured again. Then we did see in that finale in Atlanta how well Miles Sanders played, and that he maybe still has a little bit of juice, but he's not going to be the top guy in Carolina. So if that's the case, do you need to keep him around? Certainly there's an argument considering that Jonathan Brooks is going to maybe miss the entirety of the season. I had someone DM me saying the other day that it's a lot more difficult to come back from that second torn ACL in that same knee. So he could actually miss a calendar year and the entire season. We'll see what that recovery is going to be. Again, Dan Morgan and Dave Canales speaking to the media next week at the NFL Scouting Combine up in Indianapolis. So hopefully the local media who will be traveling up there, I will not be, will ask those questions and figure out what the situation is with Jonathan Brooks. Either way, Miles Sanders is doing a $1 million roster bonus on the 3rd day of the new league year. So Friday, March 14th, the Panthers would owe him $1 million. Last year, they had to give him $2 million, even though he clearly was not RB1 anymore. And then a month later, they're like, you're definitely not going to be RB2 once this rookie is healthy. So you can't give him the $1 million. It's possible that they could work out a deal to where he takes a pay cut, comes back as a number 2. I would love to see that happen, but I'm guessing it's not going to happen based off of the rhetoric of how he talked after that game in Atlanta at that OT win. He said, and I'm not even what he said, but looking at the situation, it'd be $5.2 million Carolina could save by cutting Miles Sanders. So I would say cut him to save some salary cap space, but he's willing to rework that deal and not get that roster bonus. Then that's great, and you'll probably be able to save some money there as well. Shy Tuttle is another one who has been a disappointing contract from a couple of years ago. One of those contracts signed by Scott Fitter, the former general manager, and Samir Suleiman, the former cap manager here in Carolina. He, like Miles Sanders, is also due a $1 million roster bonus somehow on the 3rd day of the new league year coming up on Friday, March 14th. And if the Panthers cut Shy Tuttle, they save $3.2 million. So looking at just those 2 players right there, that's $8.5 million basically that you're saving by cutting both of them. Now, I think the preferred scenario would be for them to decide to both take a pay cut and come back and be backups. There's value in having Miles Sanders, like there's value in having Shy Tuttle. Carolina gets back A'Shawn Robinson, who I think was, well, not even, I don't need to think this. I think everybody saw it. He was the best of the defensive linemen last year. And that's not saying a lot, but there's something still there. And you bring back Derek Brown, who is one of the top defensive tackles in the NFL, and you bring in a true nose tackle to replace Shai Tuttle. You have those three. And if you can have Shai Tuttle as a backup, that's a good foursome for Carolina in the interior defensive line, certainly. So I would prefer for Tuttle and for Sanders to, I don't know, swallow your pride's the right way to go about it, because it is a business and that's millions of dollars that are going to be left out on the table that they're both going to miss out on if they decide to take a pay cut. But maybe because Shai's from here, he'll want to do that. I don't know. You ask yourself in this situation, would you do that? Would you not accept the contract? I mean, you already accepted the contract terms that they gave you and you didn't play well. Do you want to get the money back, or do you want to move on and see if you can keep that money and go somewhere else? I don't know what they want to do, but I would love to see both those situations rectified in a way and both of them stay in Carolina. If not, that's $8.5 million Carolina saves. And then the other one, that this does not even need to be a discussion about a contract being reworked or whatever. Like, just go ahead and cut ties, because Dane Jackson showed that he is not going to be the number 2 corner in Carolina moving forward, not even the number 3 corner, as he also lost out on that job this past year to Shaw Smith-Wade. They cut him. They saved $3.3 million. It's that simple. So go ahead, make that move. Looking at those 3 combined, that's $11.8 million that Carolina saves. And if you add that up to doing an extension with Taylor Moton, which is just short at $13 million, and do an extension for J.C. Horn, which is $9 million, that's $58.6 million that Carolina would have in salary cap space to go out there and to get a new backup running back, go out and get a true nose tackle to start, to go out to add to the receiver core, to get a number 2 corner like Mike Jackson or somebody else to come back into Carolina this upcoming season. That gives them the ability to do all that they need to do, and possibly more this upcoming free agency in 2025. So that's the implication. They got $24 million, it looks like, according to Over the Cap, that they're projected to have, but there's a way to get that to over $58 million before March 10th, before March 12th, of course, when the new league year begins. And that looks like, to me, the best way for Carolina to do it. So we'll see what Dan and Brant and the rest of the crew do in Carolina leading up to the new league year starting in a couple of weeks' time in March. Andy Dalton, he's back as QB2 in Carolina. I'll tell you why that is absolutely the best thing for Carolina in the backup quarterback position. We'll talk about that here in just a moment on Locked on Panthers. This is a message from sponsor Intuit TurboTax. Taxes was waiting and wondering and worrying if you were going to get any money back, and then waiting, wondering, and worrying some more. Now Taxes is matching with a TurboTax expert who can do your taxes as soon as today. An expert who gives your taxes their undivided attention as they work on your return, while you get real-time updates on their progress so you can focus on your day. An expert who will find you every deduction possible and file every form, every investment, everything with 100% accuracy, all so you can get the most money back, guaranteed. No waiting, no wondering, no worries. Now, this is Taxes. Get an expert now on TurboTax.com. We got the news on Tuesday that Andy Dalton will be back in Carolina as QB2 for the 3rd straight year coming up here in 2025, as he and the Panthers agreed to a 2-year, $8 million deal that includes $6 million in guarantees and a max value of $10 million. And we had talked about this when looking at my offseason to-do list for Carolina. It was to simply sign a backup quarterback. I had thought maybe Carolina would want to find someone a little bit younger to back up Bryce Young, but now that Bryce, at least heading into 2025, has solidified himself as the Panther starter, we'll see if he can continue the momentum from the second half of the season into 2025 and through the rest of that year, and make it very clear that he is QB1 for the long term in Carolina. But with that settled, Carolina probably didn't really need to bring in someone younger to be a backup in possible competition, who maybe if things worked out in in this universe or an alternate universe, they would be the guy. So all they really needed was to bring back a veteran who understood the scheme and who had been a really good locker room presence, and honestly, pretty instrumental in Bryce Young's turnaround. So a couple of things, like, this was clearly the best option for Carolina. Some of the younger guys that we had talked about, Zach Wilson, maybe could have made sense, as obviously things did not work out for him with the Jets, not work out for him in Denver, but a younger guy who had been the number 2 overall pick. So maybe that could have been a reclamation project as a backup. Trey Lance is another guy. I talked about Jacoby Brissett, who is older than those guys, but maybe he could have made sense. And certainly the one who would have made, I would have thought, the most sense would have been Drew Lock, who did spend some time up there in Seattle with a large portion of this staff after he was traded from Denver in that Russell Wilson trade a couple of years ago that obviously did not work out for the Denver Broncos. So they could have gone younger with one of those options. I think Drew Lock would have been the primary option, and still possibility that they want to bring him in. But I do think that Jack Plummer is who they like as that third quarterback who will remain on the practice squad. I don't think they're going to waste a roster spot on the emergency third quarterback, which I still believe it's a waste of a roster spot to do that. So Andy Dalton having experience in this offense, he was clearly the best option for Carolina this offseason. And this is also what's best for Bryce. And I've been saying really since they brought in Bryce Young, do what you can to maximize this investment that you made in Bryce Young as a number 1 overall pick. And last year they went out there, invested on the offensive line, brought in some new receivers and weapons offensively, brought in Dave Canales and a new coaching staff to help him out. And in the end of the day, it worked out. But we cannot forget that Andy Dalton was a huge part of it working out. Clearly, Andy's presence as a veteran, going out there, being the unquestioned starter by Dave Canales for a month's time, and showing Bryce how to be a leader in an NFL locker room and how your mannerisms, how you carry yourself, that impacts the rest of the team. He learned that from Andy. So Andy being around to be that veteran presence and to show Bryce, and you can certainly say would have been nice to have this in 2023 and had Andy been the starting quarterback and let Bryce just watch, especially after that game in Seattle in week 3 where he threw for 300 yards. Why not have Bryce just sit there and wait and watch the rest of the year, or at least until he was ready? And once he was ready this past season, he was a brand new player. We saw the best of Bryce Young, and that now has Bryce set up to be the starter again this year, and really has a lot of people in the league interested in what he's going to do and what Carolina potentially is going to do this fall in the NFC South. And I mean, number 3, we know Dave Canales trusts him if he ever needs to go to him. And Dave was asked plenty of times. I said the unquestioned starter for a month's time there. Dave was asked basically every week, is Bryce going to get back in there? And he kept saying, Andy Dalton's my guy. So Andy, we do know if you need him for one start, that's the guy who can get the job done. Go back to week 3 of 2023 when Bryce had the mysterious ankle injury, which we still don't know how that was suffered in that Monday Night Football loss to the Saints in week 2. But in that game in Seattle, Andy threw for 361 yards and 2 touchdowns in that loss against the Seahawks. And go back to last season in week 3 when he took over on the road against the Raiders, 319 yards, 3 touchdowns. So as long as Andy is playing in week 3 and on the West Coast, the Panthers are pretty good. So I'm wondering if there's any sort of contract stipulation in there that says that he has to play every week 3, give Bryce a break and let him go out there and dice him up. We do not have a schedule yet, so we do not know if the Panthers will be playing on the West Coast in week 3 this year, but if they are, I'm kind of thinking Andy Dalton should be the starting quarterback, of course, joking. But Andy Dalton coming back, that's good news all around for him, for his family to stick around, and I guess for Charlotte to have the Daltons hanging around here for at least 1 more year and maybe 2 more years. And who knows, everyone loves this city. They'll probably stay forever. But that's a great situation for Carolina. So that's one box checked as far as the offseason to-do list. I'll update that probably after the first couple of rounds of free agency later on next month in March. But the franchise tag window is also open here in the NFL, and there's a couple players Carolina should be monitoring to see what happens with their current teams and whether they could be available to Carolina in a couple of weeks' time. We'll talk about that here in just a moment on Locked On Panthers. When the game tips off, the NBA action is just getting started, and there's no better place to get in on it than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game, so even if you missed the opening tip-off or want to bet on a fourth-quarter comeback, you can stay in the action. And if you're looking for a bigger payout, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay. Right now, new FanDuel customers, and that could be you, can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more. FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. The NFL's franchise tag window opened up on President's Day on Monday and is set to end on Tuesday, March 4th, which is 12 days from now. And why is this important to Carolina? As the Panthers do not have anybody who currently is on the roster that is a franchise tag candidate. No, if you're wondering, should Mike Jackson be one? He should not be one, as that would be $20 million. And because Dan Morgan and Brant Tillis and the organization bet on J.C. Horn, and he turned out to work out this past year, being a Pro Bowler, playing in 15 games, Carolina's not in a situation where they would need to place or potentially slap the tag on J.C. Horn in the next coming 12 days. So Carolina does not have a player on the roster they got to worry about in that respect. But there are players across the league, and just a handful, who Carolina really should be looking at their situations and wondering, will he be available in a couple of weeks, whether it be franchise tag and trade or just straight up available as an unrestricted free agent. Now, there's not a ton of activity expected to happen across the next 12 days when it comes to the franchise tag. And if it does happen, it's going to happen right there on Monday, the 3rd, or on Tuesday, the 4th, right before the deadline, as that's typically how these things play out. Teams want to use the next 10, 11, 12 days to continue to negotiate on long-term deals for these players. And if they don't get them done, they either let them go or they decide to slap the tag, and then they have until the middle of July to figure out what the deal is going to be. And that also would give them about another week to figure out what the salary cap is going to look like and how that impacts them moving forward into free agency. So some of the tag candidates that we're looking at are Bengals wide receiver T. Higgins, who I've stated as the apple of my eye when it comes to a potential wide receiver one in Carolina. If he is available, I would love to see that. He's already a proven player. You can question, okay, well, he played opposite of Jamar Chase and had Joe Burrow. So is he really that good? I think he's really that good. So T. Higgins would be who I'd like to have in Carolina, but the Bengals, apparently, they do want to re-sign him. Joe Burrow wants to keep him around. Like, Joe wants to have him, Jamar, and T around forever in Cincinnati. It sounds great in theory. This is a business. Will it work out? A year ago, didn't seem like he was going to be around long term. Will they do the tag again? We will see. But T. Higgins is working on a contract extension and maybe likely going to be tagged yet again up in Minnesota with the Vikings. Sam Darnold, our old buddy, they're trying to figure out what they're going to do with him. But he and Byron Murphy at corner are both two guys that are tag candidates. Obviously, Darnold's not important to this conversation. Byron Murphy could be, but I think that's still unrealistic. And then Chiefs guard Trey Smith's the other one, and that's the player you should be mad about the Carolina Panthers not drafting back in 2021. Don't be mad about Thomas Sanders. Be mad about Deontay Brown and them not taking Trey Smith, but also the blood clots, which you probably weren't aware of, or a big reason why Trey Smith, a former 5-star from the state of Tennessee who played at Tennessee, was available all the way into the 6th round. Now, there's another guy to look at as well, because the Panthers need a safety. Talked about this a couple days ago when looking at the safety position, some free agents that could make sense. Trevon Moehrig from the Raiders and Matt Bowen of ESPN.com put out the top 50 free agents and their team fits, and he made Panthers and Moehrig a team fit there in that article on Tuesday. So go check that out if you'd like. I have it tagged, or not I have the link up there on my Twitter page at Julian Council. But Javon Holland is another player that could make sense for Carolina at safety. And Cameron Wolf of the NFL Network, he went out there on Tuesday and reported that, they were on Monday rather, and reported that the Dolphins are not expected to put the franchise tag on safety Javon Holland, putting him on track to test free agency as one of the top players at his position, barring any surprises. So there's still 12 days to figure out whether they're going to do it. But right now, it looks like Byron Murphy is going to be available to Carolina, along with Trevon Moehrig and the rest of this free agent safety class. And looking at spot track to place for contracts, his current market value is 4 years, $60 million. That's an average annual value of $15 million. Carolina spent a lot of money on the interior at guard. I think they should spend a lot of money to get a defensive tackle, a true nose tackle this offseason, and would not scoff at them if they do indeed open up that $58 million cap space we talked about earlier on the show. Would not be mad at them at all for trying to give $15 million per year to Javon Holland to come in and be their starting safety. Maybe it's cheaper to have Trevon Moehrig be there. Either way, they need another starting safety as they watch 5 guys currently, really 2 of them that are most notable, that being Jordan Fuller and that being Xavier Woods. You could argue only one of them is very notable in that situation, who are set to be free agents in a couple of weeks' time. Now, Byron Murphy, mention him. That's a situation where I don't think it's realistic right now for Carolina. They do need a number 2 corner. He probably views himself as a number 1, and JC's already here, and Carolina's got to figure out what they're going to do there. It would be very odd for Carolina to not extend JC and then to go back a week later and then to sign Byron Murphy, who is not going to be franchised. As the Vikings, this is from Dan Graziano of ESPN.com, the Vikings and Byron Murphy agreed to push back the void date on his contract. Originally, the deal voided 23 days prior to the start of the new league year, which is right around today. Now it's the day before the start of the league year, which means Murphy cannot be franchise tagged since that date is past the deadline for teams to use the tag, which is, again, Tuesday, March 4th. Looking at Spot Track, the player contracts, his market value is 4 years, $88 million, y'all. That's an average annual value of $22 million. Talk about JC Horn. We have talked about that 23, 24 mil potentially, which is the top end for corners. That's what he's likely looking for and probably going to get from Carolina if they're willing to do it. So are you going to not extend him and then go extend somebody else for right around the same value? I don't know if Murphy is going to get 22 mil per year and be one of the top 5 paid corners in the National Football League. I don't know whether he views himself that way. I certainly would if I were him, especially when having these contract talks. That's just something to look at. I know people have talked about randomly just in the Panthers verse of, JC Horn, maybe you tag and trade him somewhere else and do the same thing to do with Brian Burns. I wouldn't like to see that at all. It would give teams, they don't have to tag. He's already 50-year option where they could trade him, and there'd be a pretty large return, as I believe he's a top 10 corner. There'd be a big return if you do that, considering that a team would have a full calendar year to negotiate with him. And that's a big reason why the Burns deal was not the kind of compensation that was originally offered by the Rams, at least reportedly offered by the Rams before then, when he had a lot more time. Last year, when it's already the 5th-year option. It's not the 5th-year option, it's salary cap. It's the franchise tag, and that's what his cap it's going to be. You got to go ahead and extend him right away, and that made an impact on what the Giants and teams were willing to give Carolina. Would be different with JC Horn. So you could, I guess in theory, trade JC Horn, probably get back a first-round pick, maybe the equivalent of a first-round pick, and then turn around and with Byron Murphy and give him maybe less money than what Horn's looking for. But again, I don't know what Murphy's looking for, but based off a Spot Track, they're projecting he's going to get top 5 cornerback money in this market. So that is probably not realistic for Carolina. It would be cool if they could have both Murphy and both JC Horn. But I would think unlikely. Again, T. Higgins, we're looking at that situation. And Javon Holland, that's another one we're looking at, as it looks like, unless any surprises arise down there in Miami with Stephen Ross and the folks, he's going to be a free agent, and that would be one of the top candidates coming here to be a starting safety for Carolina in 2025. That's going to wrap up this edition of the Locked On Panthers podcast, a part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Again, y'all, subscribe or follow the show for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. And be sure to follow me, Julian Council, over on Twitter at Julian Council, where tomorrow on Friday, I'm back answering your weekly Friday mailbag questions. All you got to do is either at me or DM me over on Twitter at Julian Council to get your questions in for the weekly Friday mailbag here on Locked On Panthers. In the meantime, be safe, be happy, be whole. As always, keep pounding, and I'll talk to y'all on Friday.